In the early 20th century, visionary engineer Reginald Dacey created the first automatic nanny. After hiring a shitty and ill-tempered human nanny for his own child, Dacey became convinced that his automatic nanny invention would be much better equipped to raise a child than a human, from both practical and psychological perspectives. So at first, the robot nanny was a great success. It was adopted by a growing number of happy families. But then, disaster. The automatic nanny malfunctioned, killing a child. Many years later, Dacey's son, Lionel, who was raised by the automatic nanny himself, was attempting to recover his father's legacy. He publicly shared the raising of his own child exclusively with the automatic nanny. But the unfortunate result was a child void of the ability to connect with other humans. Spoiler, this is not a real story. This is one of the short tales from Exhalation, which is a bunch of really, really fascinating short stories by Ted Chiang. I strongly recommend checking that out. I'll leave a link in there. So at this point, after listening to the story, you might be thinking, no way would I let a robot raise my kid. The reality, however, is that the automatic nanny is coming very soon. And you're probably going to buy one. Let's unpack why. AI progress to the automatic nanny. So some of the more mainstream forecasts are starting to price in the economic impact of rapid AI progress. Here are some of the forecasts from IMF, PwC, and McKinsey. We have an IMF blog here which talks about AI transformation to the global economy. It's mostly about AI's impact on work and jobs. A similar PwC report which is talking about the size of economic growth in terms of dollar value. And then another report here by McKinsey, more specifically focused on generative AI and what it's going to do to work and jobs. So regardless of the fact that these more mainstream reports are starting to price in some of the huge economic implications of AI progress, the most aggressive, if I'm understanding it correctly, is still only betting on a possible 25% GDP increase over the next decade, over the next 10 years. Some of the more, let's call them nuanced forecasts of AI economic progress. These are the reports or the investigations which factor in a more deeper understanding of the technology and also the implications of an intelligence explosion, which I've spoken about at length, are suggesting a possible 30% plus GDP increase per year. So more than a 10x increase per year, and they're forecasting that could potentially happen within the decade.
Conference attendees and AI experts to that effect. This view seems not to be widely shared among economists. Indeed, the vast majority of economists seem to assign extremely low probability to any scenario where growth, even increases again by as much as, say, it did during the Industrial Revolution. So Tom Davidson, who you had on the show, defines explosive growth with this measure of 30% annual growth in economic output. And you can say modulo things like pandemic recovery or some other things of that sort. But that seemed to be something the vast majority of economists, particularly growth economists, and even people interested in current AI and economics.
So to put things into perspective, the global economic growth rate is currently around 2 to 3%. Before the Industrial Revolution, annual GDP growth was typically below 0.5% in most countries. Post-Industrial Revolution, British GDP growth increased about 1 to 2% per year. It took a lot longer for the rest of the world to catch up, but there was still a significant growth rate. The internet and information technology revolutions have had similar impacts on the economy. these are massive economic transformations. So the thought of going from 3% to 30% is insane. It's still up for debate whether current AI progress will lead to an intelligence explosion, which would be required in some way to hit this 10x economic growth rate. I'll leave it up to you to decide what you think there. When you start to consider both A, the current trajectory and progress, and B, the forces that are pushing us toward continued progress, we have to start considering this level of economic growth, this 30% increase or 10x. You have to start considering it a real possibility. So Epoch AI, I've got one of their reports here, has published some great work breaking down the compute trends and developments over time in AI and machine learning, and also another report which compares the arguments for and against explosive growth. I'll also share some links to those reports in the essay. So this level of rapid transformation and growth, as you can imagine, compressed into a disturbingly short time frame, makes it impossible to even imagine how things might look 10 years from now. Here's a short discussion on some of the potential economic repercussions of an intelligence explosion. This is a conversation between Raupal Balaji and Emad Mistake.
Conference.
Neural processing unit runs at 5 watts of power, which is less than the human brain for a Llama 7B model. The energy equation changes, and classically we've seen this relationship between GDP and energy use by an economy. So higher economies use higher energy use. That's always been a constraint. Whereas now a company can use much less energy
which is productivity, essentially.
Productivity. And so economic variables may go through the roof, but then does the quality of human life? Does our civil society? These are some of the questions that we have to answer.
And I agree. These things, which is what you were touching on as well, is I'm not even sure we're going to measure economies in the right way.
Well, yeah. So here's another way of thinking about it.
So why you're probably going to buy an automatic nanny? Most people have a hard time imagining the implications of an intelligence explosion. If we move along this spectrum toward more general intelligence within the decade, there's a really good chance we're going to experience this level of rapid economic growth. So regardless of your moral position or concerns, or whether or not you think a child is better raised by a human nanny, the more interesting implication is there's just not going to be any human nannies. An intelligence and explosion will abstract away most current human labor, both cognitive work and manual work. You'll have diminishing interactions with human doctors, lawyers, waiters, travel agents, or nannies. Not just because AI will be more efficient or you prefer a human, but because the cost of human labor will become hugely expensive as artificial intelligence becomes more intelligent and cheaper. So these jobs are just going to cease to exist anymore. The entire economy and nature of work will be unrecognizable. Regardless of whether or not you resist the automatic nanny, there will come a point when AI has replaced all of your favorite incompetent human services. So enjoy these days.